The galaxy was a vast place, filled with a multitude of species and planets. Some of these worlds were peaceful, while others, like Earth, were dangerous beyond comprehension. Earth was what they called a death world, a planet where everything, from the wildlife to the environment, seemed intent on killing anything that lived there. For most species, it was a place that was both fascinating and terrifying, but the humans that came from there were different. The setting was the Galactic University, a renowned school where the galaxy's brightest minds came together to learn from each other. Alien students from various species have been selected to participate in a special safety program designed to teach the importance of survival techniques in various environments. They had all come to this school to learn how to handle dangers that could come from natural disasters, hostile species, and treacherous environments. The idea was simple: prepare students to face the unknown dangers that lurked in the galaxy. On the first day of class, the students gathered in the large lecture hall, full of excitement and curiosity. They were eager to meet the new students who would be joining them from Earth, humans who were known across the galaxy for their reputation of surviving the most dangerous world in existence. Some of the students had heard stories about humans, but none of them had met one face to face. The teacher, an alien from the peaceful planet of Laroka, stood at the front of the classroom. He was tall, with translucent blue skin and glowing eyes. His species had been known for their calm demeanor and intellectual prowess, always using logic and diplomacy to resolve conflicts. He had seen many species in his time, but he knew little about the humans, except that they came from a world where survival was a daily struggle. Still, he was sure that they would be no different from the others who came to the university. As the clock struck, the doors opened and in walked the humans, 2 young students from Earth. They were dressed in the standard galactic attire, simple jumpsuits designed for comfort in any environment. At first glance, they seemed just like any other students, but as they walked into the room, the atmosphere shifted. There was a certain stillness about them, a calmness that struck the alien students as odd. These humans weren't excited or nervous about the new environment. They were simply unaffected. The teacher cleared his throat and began his introduction. Welcome, everyone. Today we have a special group of students joining us from Earth. They are known as Deathworlders, and they are here to learn alongside all of you. Now, I'm sure you've heard stories about how dangerous their planet is. It's a place where life is always at risk. Wild animals, natural disasters, even their own technology is a threat to their survival. But here, they are just like everyone else. There is no need to fear them or their reputation. In fact, they may have a lot to learn from all of you. The alien students murmured among themselves, eyeing the humans curiously. They couldn't help but wonder how these Deathworlders would fit into the class. After all, if their planet was so dangerous, how could they possibly survive in this controlled, safe environment? Then the teacher said something that made the whole room go quiet. Unlike all of you, the humans do not need safety lessons. They fear nothing. The words hung in the air. The alien students exchanged confused glances. What did the teacher mean? How could anyone, let alone a human, fear nothing? Was it some kind of joke? The humans, however, remained completely still. They didn't react to the teacher's words. Their faces remained calm, as if they were already prepared for whatever was about to happen. The teacher smiled at the students, amused by their confusion. We'll begin with a simple exercise. I'm sure you all remember the basic safety procedures for hazardous environments, such as dealing with toxic gases or sudden fires. This will be a good way to start, and the humans will participate just like everyone else. The simulation was set up in an instant. The room was transformed into a virtual hazardous environment. Thick smoke filled the air, the ground shook, and emergency alarms sounded off. The aliens immediately followed their safety instructions. They quickly donned protective gear, checked their equipment, and began to move through the simulation cautiously. But the humans, they didn't seem concerned at all. In fact, they moved as if they were walking through a calm park on Earth. They didn't rush to put on protective gear. They didn't panic or flinch at the alarms. They simply walked into the simulation, as if they had faced far worse and survived it all. The alien students watched in astonishment. Some even froze in place, unable to understand what was happening. How could the humans be so calm? Didn't they realize that the environment was dangerous? One of the students, a young alien from a peaceful world called Zolaria, raised a hand and asked the teacher, "Professor, why aren't they doing the exercise like the rest of us? Don't they need protection from the toxic gas?" The teacher looked at the human students, then back at the alien students. His eyes sparkled with an emotion they couldn't quite place. The humans do not need protection, because this is nothing compared to what they face every day on their home planet. A gasp ran through the room. The aliens had no idea what the teacher meant. The simulation was still going on, but the aliens weren't paying attention to it anymore. Their focus was entirely on the humans, whose calm demeanor only seemed more out of place the longer they observed. The question was now on everyone's mind. What kind of creatures were these humans? What could possibly make them so different from everyone else? The teacher paused for a moment, letting the silence fill the room. Then he said, "You will learn soon enough. For now, just watch. Observe closely, and you may begin to understand why Deathworlders fear nothing." The suspense hung in the air like the smoke from the simulation. The aliens didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to change in a way they could never have imagined. The unseen test. As the simulation continued, the alien students slowly began to realize that something was deeply unsettling about the humans' behavior. The smoke thickened, the temperature dropped, and the ground trembled underfoot. Yet the humans didn't flinch. They walked through the chaos with a quiet confidence that bewildered everyone in the room. Zolaria, the young alien from the peaceful planet of Zolaria, couldn't take her eyes off the humans. She had never seen anyone act like this before. The peaceful societies she had grown up in dealt with danger in a logical way. Protection first, panic second. But these humans, they didn't react at all. She couldn't comprehend it. How can they not be scared? She whispered to her friend, a tall alien with sleek, silver skin named Terran. Terran shook his head, his sharp, angular features showing deep confusion. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. This is dangerous, really dangerous. If they don't act soon, they'll be harmed." But Zolaria wasn't so sure. There was something about the humans that didn't make sense, something that felt different. The other students were panicking, scrambling for their safety equipment, and following the emergency protocols. But the humans continued as if they were walking through an ordinary day. Meanwhile, the teacher, Professor Valak, was watching from the control room. His calm demeanor never wavered, even though he could see the alien students were starting to panic. The humans were a test, but it wasn't the kind of test the aliens had been prepared for. This wasn't a safety exercise. No, it was much more than that. It was a glimpse into the mindset of the Deathworlders, a rare opportunity to witness firsthand what made these creatures so unique. Valak knew the humans had no reason to fear what was happening in the simulation. After all, the real dangers of their homeworld made these simulations look like child's play. The environment they had created was nothing compared to the savage beasts, dangerous weather, and unpredictable landscapes that the humans faced daily. Earth was a place where everything from the smallest insect to the largest predator was designed to kill. But the students didn't know that yet. They were still watching the humans, who had now reached the center of the simulation where the most intense hazard was, a massive structural collapse that threatened to crush anything in its path. The aliens gasped as the humans didn't even hesitate. One of the students, a young human male with short, messy hair, stepped forward and reached out with his hand to catch the falling debris. His movements were quick and precise, as though he had trained for moments like this all his life. He used no protective gear, nothing at all, just his bare hands. The aliens watched in shock as the pieces of debris slowed and stopped in midair, hovering for a moment before gently falling to the ground. Solaria's mouth went dry. Did he stop that? With his hands. Terran could barely speak. That's impossible. No one can do that. Not even the strongest among us. The human student didn't break a sweat. He gave a brief smile and turned toward the other humans, who were casually walking through the rubble, avoiding it with ease. It was as though they had already seen much worse and learned how to adapt to it. They didn't look out of place. They looked confident. Professor Valak, from the control room, couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. The simulation had been designed to test the students' ability to adapt to various survival scenarios. Most of the aliens were struggling, looking for safety, but the humans had already learned how to cope with the impossible. His voice echoed in the room as he addressed the students through the speakers. This is only the beginning. The humans have shown you what you've never seen before, but what you don't realize yet is that these are the kind of beings who have survived against the odds, against environments that would destroy anyone else. The fear you feel, the uncertainty, it's because you've never truly faced danger the way they have. The alien students went silent. They had all heard of Earth's reputation. Some had heard stories of humans battling vicious creatures, surviving storms that could tear planets apart, and overcoming threats that would make most species run in fear. But now they were seeing it firsthand, and it was more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. Zolaria was shaking, not from fear, but from awe. I don't understand. How do they do it? Valak's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. You'll learn soon enough. You see, it's not just their bodies that make them strong. It's their minds. Humans don't simply react to danger. They don't retreat. They face it head-on and adapt. That's why they fear nothing. The room was eerily quiet now. The other students had stopped panicking. They were watching the humans, trying to understand them, trying to figure out what made them so different. Some of the students even began to mimic the humans' calm movements, but it was clear that they were not yet able to replicate the same confidence. As the simulation ended, the aliens were left in stunned silence. They had survived, but it was clear that they were not the same as before. They had learned something important, something that had shaken them to their core. Professor Valak watched as the human students calmly exited the simulation area, chatting with one another like they had just finished a casual walk. The aliens couldn't help but feel a new respect for these creatures from the most dangerous world in the galaxy. But the question still lingered in their minds. How had the humans learned to survive the impossible? Valak's voice rang out once more. This is just a glimpse. You will learn more in time, but for now, remember, the Deathworlders fear nothing. And soon, you will understand why. The aliens left the simulation room with their heads full of questions and a sense of wonder. They had been tested, but they had only just begun to scratch the surface of what made the humans so extraordinary. They couldn't wait to find out what came next. But one thing was certain, the galaxy would never look the same again. The harsh reality of Earth. As the alien students left the simulation room, their minds were racing. The fear and uncertainty they had felt during the exercise hadn't completely dissipated. In fact, it had only grown. They had heard stories about the Deathworlders, humans, and the dangers of their home planet. But hearing stories was one thing. Seeing it firsthand was something entirely different. Zolaria, who had always prided herself on her calm and rational approach to problem-solving, found herself unable to shake the feeling of awe and disbelief. She had seen death and destruction in her travels across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared her for the chilling certainty that humans faced danger in ways no other species ever could. How is it possible? Zolaria whispered to Terran as they walked down the hallway toward their next class. How do they survive those conditions? What makes them so different? Terran, ever the logical one, seemed equally perplexed. I don't know, but something about them. It's like they're built for it. The way they move, the way they act, it's as if they've been molded by their environment. Zolaria couldn't shake the image of the human student, standing amid the crumbling structure, casually stopping debris with his bare hands. How could anyone survive in such a hostile world and still walk away unscathed? Back in the control room, Professor Valak observed the students' reactions with a thoughtful expression. He had seen their fear, and he knew that fear was the first step toward understanding the Deathworlders. But what they didn't yet understand was that it wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving in the face of impossible odds. Humans didn't just endure, they overcame. "Did you see their faces?" one of the other instructors asked Valak, his voice low. "They've never been this shaken before." Valak nodded slowly. "The Deathworlders are more than just a test for our students. They're a lesson in survival, in adaptability. What these students don't realize is that humans don't just survive because they are strong. They survive because they are relentless. The environment they come from teaches them to face challenges head-on, and it shapes their very nature." The alien instructor let out a long breath. "I've heard the stories, but seeing it firsthand, it's something else." "I'm not sure the students will fully grasp it yet," Valak continued, "but they will soon enough. The question is not whether they can survive, but whether they can learn from the humans' example. They've seen how we avoid danger, how we plan for every possible contingency. But humans don't wait for danger to come. They charge right into it, unafraid. And that's something no simulation can teach." Meanwhile, the alien students were still trying to process the experience. They had learned something about humans that no textbook or instructor could have ever explained. Earth was a place where the laws of survival were different, where danger was a constant, and only the most adaptable could endure. Zolaria was sitting in the quiet corner of the cafeteria, trying to make sense of it all. Around her, the other students were talking excitedly, trying to process their own feelings. Some were asking questions, while others seemed lost in thought. It was clear that the simulation had left an impact, but Zolaria wasn't sure what that impact was yet. All she knew was that the Deathworlders had opened her eyes to something she had never considered. "What do you think we'll learn next?" Terran asked, sitting down beside her with his tray of food. "The humans. There's something else. I can't even begin to understand how they function." "What's their secret?" Zolaria frowned. "I don't think it's a secret. I think it's just a way of life for them. I've heard of their battles, their wars, their survival stories. But I never thought it would be like this. The way they face danger, the way they approach life. It's almost like they're immune to fear." Terran stared at his food, deep in thought. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's not that they fear nothing. Maybe it's that they've learned to control their fear. I've never seen anyone so calm in the face of danger. It's like they have no concept of what it means to back down. Zolaria nodded, but there was something unsettling about the idea. "I think they have fear, but they've learned to use it. They don't run from it. They face it head-on. And that makes them stronger than anything we've seen before." As the day went on, the alien students couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. They had spent their lives learning to avoid danger, to predict it and plan for it. But the humans didn't avoid it. They embraced it. And that was something they couldn't ignore. Back in the training hall, a new lesson was about to begin. The aliens were going to face their first real challenge, an obstacle course designed to test their physical and mental limits. It would be the first time they truly saw what it meant to push themselves to the edge and beyond. But even as they prepared, the lingering question remained. How would they face this challenge? Would they use their training, their knowledge, to stay safe? Or would they, like the humans, push themselves into the unknown, ready to face whatever came their way? Professor Valak stood in front of the students, his eyes glinting with curiosity. "This is it," he said. "The first true test. You've seen what the Deathworlders can do. Now, it's time to see if you can learn from them." The students exchanged nervous glances. They were about to find out what it meant to be truly fearless, and for some of them, it was going to be a lesson they would never forget. The first test. The alien students were nervous. They had seen how the Deathworlders, Humans faced danger without hesitation, without fear. Now, it was their turn to prove themselves. The obstacle course ahead was unlike anything they had ever faced. It wasn't just a test of physical ability. It was a test of their mental fortitude and how they reacted under pressure. This was no ordinary challenge. This was a trial to see if they could learn to embrace the unknown like the humans had. Professor Valok stood at the edge of the course, his stern gaze watching as the students gathered in front of him. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke. This is the first true test of your adaptability. You will face challenges that push you to your limits. And remember, the Deathworlders don't just survive. They thrive in these situations. Do not expect mercy. Do not expect an easy path. Zolaria and Terran exchanged a glance. They had no idea what they were about to face, but they knew it wouldn't be easy. The stories they had heard about Earth were just stories, legends, perhaps. But now they were going to experience the danger themselves. It was one thing to watch a human handle a lethal environment. It was another thing entirely to face it. The course began, and the students immediately found themselves in a chaotic, unfamiliar environment. It was a maze of obstacles, with moving platforms, sudden drops, and hazardous terrains. The air was thick with tension. Zolaria's heart raced as she took the first step onto the course. Her feet felt unsteady, and the ground beneath her seemed to shift, threatening to throw her off balance. "Focus, Zolaria," she told herself. "You can do this." She took another step, carefully calculating her next move. The platform ahead of her was moving quickly, and she had to time her jump just right to avoid falling. But as she leaped, she felt a surge of doubt. What if she failed? What if she fell? The consequences could be disastrous. But then she remembered the humans. They didn't hesitate. They didn't overthink things. They acted. With a deep breath, she pushed aside her fear and jumped, landing firmly on the next platform. Her body felt light, and she couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline as she moved forward. Terran was ahead of her, his eyes locked on the course as he moved with precision. He had always been logical, always thinking several steps ahead. But today, logic wasn't enough. The course wasn't about being smart. It was about being fearless. Terran had to learn to let go of his careful planning and embrace the chaos. As they progressed, the challenges became more intense. Walls began to close in around them, forcing them to make quick decisions and react on instinct. The alien students were not used to this kind of unpredictability. They had always trained in controlled environments where everything was calculated and predictable. But the Deathworlders, humans, had thrived in chaos. They hadn't just survived Earth's dangers. They had learned to master them. Professor Valok watched the students with interest. This was a moment of truth for them. Could they adapt to the harsh reality of survival, or would they crumble under pressure? Zolaria's heart pounded in her chest as she faced an enormous obstacle. A massive wall of water was rising ahead of her, threatening to drown everything in its path. She could hear the water rushing, the sound growing louder and louder. Panic bubbled up inside her, but she pushed it down. She remembered the humans, how they had faced impossible odds and overcome them. With a sudden burst of energy, she sprinted toward the wall, her mind focused on one thing: survival. She leaped into the air, her hands reaching for a ledge just above the water's surface. She caught it with her fingertips, her body dangling in the air. For a moment, she thought she might fall. But then she heard the sound of Terran's voice behind her, urging her to keep going. "Keep climbing," Terran shouted. "You're almost there." With a surge of strength, Zolaria pulled herself up, her muscles burning with effort. As she reached the top, she couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. She had done it. She had faced the danger, and she had conquered it. But as she looked around, she saw that not all the students had made it. Some were still struggling, their faces filled with fear and uncertainty. They weren't used to facing such raw, unfiltered danger. They had always been taught to avoid it, to be cautious. But that wasn't going to work here. Terran was close behind her, but he too struggled with the unpredictable nature of the course. Every step felt uncertain, every move a risk. But he pressed on, refusing to give in. He was determined to finish, to prove that he could face the unknown just as the humans had. Professor Valak's eyes narrowed as he observed their progress. He could see the fear in some of the students' faces, but he also saw the spark of realization in others. They were learning. Slowly but surely, they were starting to understand what it meant to embrace uncertainty. The test wasn't over yet, but already Valak could see the seeds of growth being planted. The alien students were beginning to grasp the concept of fearlessness, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. They were starting to understand why the Deathworlders were so formidable. The students were now entering the final stretch of the course. It was the hardest part yet, an obstacle that required not only physical skill but mental fortitude. They would have to climb a sheer cliff, with nothing but their own strength to rely on. The wall loomed ahead of them, slick with moisture and covered in jagged rocks. Zolaria took a deep breath and began her ascent, her hands gripping the rough surface. She knew this was it, the moment that would determine whether she had truly learned from the humans. The others were climbing alongside her, each of them pushing themselves harder than they ever had before. But as Zolaria reached the halfway point, she felt her strength begin to fade. Her muscles screamed in protest, and for a moment, she wanted to give up. But then, she remembered the humans, the way they had never stopped fighting, even when the odds were stacked against them. With a renewed sense of determination, Zolaria pulled herself up, her fingers gripping tighter. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. The course ended with a final jump, a leap to a platform that seemed impossibly far away. Zolaria took a deep breath and launched herself into the air, her body soaring toward the platform. For a moment, time seemed to slow. She could feel the wind rushing past her, hear the others behind her, pushing themselves just as hard. And then, with a burst of energy, she landed. Her feet hit the platform, and she stumbled, barely managing to stay upright. But she had made it. She had conquered the test. Terran was not far behind her, and soon the others followed. They had all faced the challenge, and each of them had learned something important. They weren't just surviving the course. They were learning to embrace the unknown. And that was something the Deathworlders knew how to do better than anyone. Professor Valak watched the students with a proud smile. "Well done," he said. "You've passed the first test. But remember, this is just the beginning. There's much more to learn from the Deathworlders, and you'll need all of it to survive what's coming next." The challenge of adapting. The students had passed the first test, but the trials were far from over. Now, they would face the hardest challenge yet, adapting to the unpredictable world of the Deathworlders. This would test not just their physical limits, but their ability to think and react quickly in the face of danger. It was a challenge that no other species had ever truly been able to master. Humans had lived through it, and now the aliens would have to learn to do the same. The following day, they gathered once again, this time on a vast, open training field. Professor Valak stood in front of them, his arms crossed, watching as they prepared. They had just completed their morning exercises, but the real test was about to begin. Today, Valak began, his voice grave. "You will face the most dangerous test of all. You will have to survive, adapt, and respond. The Deathworlders do not have the luxury of predictable environments. They face every situation as it comes, without hesitation or fear. You must do the same." The students exchanged uneasy glances. Zolaria could see it in their eyes. The doubt, the fear, the uncertainty. But it wasn't just them. She could feel it too. This test would be unlike anything they had faced before. Professor Valak nodded toward the field behind him. Suddenly, the ground began to shift. Sections of the earth cracked open, revealing deep pits, while towering structures rose from the ground, moving in unpredictable patterns. The terrain was changing, and the students could feel the pressure mounting. "You have no idea what challenges you will face here," Valak continued. Some of you will fall. But those who remain will learn something valuable. The Deathworlders do not back down. They adapt. With that, the test began. The students had no time to prepare. The ground beneath their feet started to tremble, and the obstacles they faced were not just physical. They were mental, emotional, and psychological. One by one, they had to navigate the shifting terrain, avoiding falling into the pits that had appeared without warning. They had to make decisions in the blink of an eye, trusting their instincts and their training. Zolaria found herself facing a towering wall that seemed to rise out of nowhere. It was slick with moisture, the surface covered in sharp rocks. She knew she had to climb it, but she hesitated. What if she slipped? What if she couldn't make it? Then she thought of the humans. They never hesitated. They acted. They climbed. They fought. They survived. She had seen them face worse dangers on their home planet, on Earth. If they could do it, so could she. With renewed determination, she reached out, her fingers finding purchase on the rocky surface. She started climbing, her muscles burning with each pull. The wall was taller than she had expected, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not now. Behind her, Terran was struggling with another obstacle. The ground beneath him had cracked open, and he was now facing a deadly, fast-moving river of molten rock. He could feel the heat rising, the danger closing in. But he refused to let fear take over. He had trained for this, just like the humans. Without a second thought, Terran leaped, pushing himself over the molten river. He landed on the other side with a thud, his heart racing. He had done it, but the course was far from over. Every step was a challenge, every decision a risk. The students couldn't afford to make mistakes. The rest of the students were scattered across the field, each facing their own challenges. Some were making their way across narrow ledges high above the ground, while others were trying to scale the sheer cliffs that seemed to appear at random. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that the Deathworlders thrived in. Zolaria reached the top of the wall, her breath coming in heavy gasps. She looked around and saw Terran on the other side, moving quickly, his eyes focused. She could see the determination in his face. He had learned the lesson of the Deathworlders. They didn't wait for the perfect moment. They didn't plan every move. They reacted. Zolaria felt a wave of realization wash over her. The fear she had felt earlier was gone. She had adapted. She had learned to embrace the unpredictability. The course was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she was truly ready for what came next. But there was no time to celebrate. The ground shifted again, and a massive, terrifying creature emerged from the earth. It was unlike anything the students had seen before, half-formed, covered in thick scales, and moving with deadly speed. It was a predator, and it was hunting them. The students froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. This was it, the ultimate test. They had to face something truly dangerous. But before they could react, the creature charged forward, its jaws snapping. Zolaria didn't hesitate. She grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it at the creature, aiming for its eyes. The rock struck, and the creature roared in pain, momentarily disoriented. The students reacted, running to find shelter or to fight back. It wasn't the way they had trained. It was the way the humans would have done it. It was survival. Terran moved toward the creature, his eyes locked on it, calculating his next move. He wasn't thinking about how big or dangerous the creature was. He was thinking about how to defeat it. With one final, decisive move, Terran found a weak point in the creature's hide and struck. It was over. The creature collapsed, defeated. The students stood in stunned silence, breathing heavily, their hearts still racing. They had faced the unimaginable, and they had survived. Professor Valak stepped forward, a rare smile on his face. "Well done," he said, his voice filled with approval. "You have learned to adapt. You have learned to survive. And most importantly, you have learned to think like the Deathworlders." The students were exhausted, but there was a sense of pride in their eyes. They had come a long way. But they knew there was more to learn. The Deathworlders had shown them a new way of thinking, a new way of living. It was a lesson they would never forget. The students were battered and bruised from their earlier challenges, but they could not afford to rest. Professor Valak had warned them that the final test was coming, and no one knew exactly what it would entail. Each student felt the weight of anticipation hanging over them like a dark cloud. They had proven their ability to survive, to adapt, and to think under pressure. But this last trial would be different. As they gathered in the center of the training field, the air felt charged, as if the very ground beneath their feet was preparing for something extraordinary. The once tranquil environment had transformed into something more like a battlefield. Dangerous, unpredictable, and alive. The students stood shoulder to shoulder, awaiting their final challenge. Today, Professor Valak began, his voice carrying a sense of finality. You will face the last lesson the Deathworlders have to offer. You will not be judged on your ability to climb walls, run across fields, or face monsters. You will be judged on your capacity to survive in the most chaotic, dangerous conditions imaginable. You will experience what it truly means to be a Deathworlder. A shiver ran down Zolaria's spine. She had felt fear before, but now, it was different. This wasn't about physical strength or speed. It was about mental toughness, the ability to face danger and make the right decision when everything was falling apart around them. As Valak spoke, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. The sky above darkened, and the atmosphere became thick and oppressive. Then, without warning, the terrain began to change once again. The training field shifted violently, and in moments, the students found themselves on what looked like the surface of a hostile planet. The ground was cracked and uneven, with volcanic fissures running along the length of the field. The sky was clouded with ash, and strange, threatening shapes moved in the distance. Zolaria's heart began to race. It looked like a death world, one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy, and yet they were supposed to thrive here. This is the final trial. Valak's voice rang out over the chaos. You must survive on this death world for 1 hour. Your objective is simple: escape. But remember, nothing here is predictable. Every second counts. Trust in your training, and more importantly, trust your instincts. Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them cracked open, and the first of the challenges appeared. A massive creature, its scales glinting in the ashen light. It was enormous, easily the size of several buildings stacked together. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, predatory light, and its growl sent a shiver through the students. This is what it means to be a Deathworlder, Valak said, almost to himself. They don't face a single enemy. They face many. And they fight, not just to win, but to survive. The students instantly scattered, the pressure mounting as they ran in different directions, their hearts pounding in their chests. Zolaria moved quickly, her mind racing to analyze their surroundings. There was no time to wait for someone else to lead. They would have to rely on their own instincts. The creature roared again, sending a shockwave through the air that knocked some students off their feet. It was fast, far faster than any of them had anticipated, and its massive claws tore through the earth as it advanced toward them. Zolaria barely dodged one swipe, feeling the rush of wind as the claws slashed just inches from her face. She knew she had no choice but to fight back or risk becoming its next meal. She grabbed a large rock from the ground, her fingers tight around it, and hurled it directly at the creature's glowing eyes. It was a risky move, but it worked. The rock struck the creature with a satisfying thud, and it stumbled back, momentarily blinded. Terran, who had been quick to react, was already pulling out a small energy weapon from his pack. He fired it at the creature, aiming for its legs. The shot didn't take it down, but it slowed the beast enough to give him a few seconds to rethink his strategy. Zolaria, Terran shouted over the noise. We need to move. The creature won't be down for long. Zolaria nodded, adrenaline surging through her veins as she sprinted to catch up with him. The others were scattered, some trying to fight the creature, while others ran in search of cover. But Zolaria knew that this wasn't about defeating the monster. It was about surviving long enough to escape. A loud crack echoed through the sky as another terrifying shape appeared in the distance. This time, it wasn't a creature, but a massive storm cloud, crackling with dangerous energy. It was clear that the trial was designed to force them into impossible situations where they had to make split-second decisions. Zolaria felt the heat of the storm closing in and knew that there wasn't much time left. They had to find shelter, or they would be caught in the destructive force of the storm. The terrain was chaotic, filled with jagged rocks and deep chasms, making it difficult to find a safe path. But Zolaria's mind was sharp, and she spotted a narrow crevice in the rocks ahead. She sprinted toward it, motioning for Terran to follow. They'd reached the crevice just as the storm struck. The ground shook beneath their feet as lightning flashed across the sky, and the air hummed with static energy. Zolaria and Terran crouched low, their bodies pressed against the rock, as the storm raged above them. The wind howled, and the landscape around them trembled with the force of nature. Through the crackling of the storm, they could hear the growls of the creature still hunting them. It wasn't over yet. They had survived the first wave, but more dangers were still waiting. They had to move, and quickly. "We can't stay here long," Terran said, his voice trained. "We need to find a way out." Zolaria nodded, her mind working rapidly. She knew the storm would pass, but the creature wouldn't give up that easily. The question was, how could they escape before they ran out of time? Then, as if the universe itself had answered, a distant rumble echoed from deep within the terrain. Something else was coming. Something bigger. "Move," Zolaria shouted. "We need to keep going." The next stage of their trial was just beginning, and they knew it was going to be the hardest yet. The clock was ticking, and survival depended on every decision they made. There was no turning back now. The rumbling from deep within the death world grew louder, sending a wave of dread through the students. Zolaria's breath came in ragged gasps as she turned to Terran. "We need to move now. That storm won't last forever, but we can't outrun the creature if we don't act fast." Terran nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew they had to act quickly, or they would be trapped between the storm and the ever-approaching monster. The world around them was an alien hellscape, each second spent in it a gamble with death. He grabbed Zolaria's arm and pulled her toward the rocky outcrop that seemed to promise shelter. But as they neared it, the ground beneath them began to crack and shift. The monstrous creature from earlier was getting closer, its massive claws tearing into the earth, each step shaking the ground beneath them. The air smelled of sulfur, and the heat from the nearby fissures made it nearly unbearable to breathe. Zolaria could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but there was no time for fear. "Stay focused," she muttered to herself, forcing her mind to block out the panic that tried to rise. They couldn't afford distractions. They needed to find a way to survive. As they neared the shelter, Zolaria spotted something in the distance, another structure, one that looked oddly familiar. It wasn't much, but it could be a way out. Her mind raced. If they could make it there before the creature reached them, they might just have a chance. It was a long shot, but what other choice did they have? "Over there," Zolaria pointed. "That way. We can make it to that structure." Terran hesitated for a moment, looking back at the beast that was closing in on them. "Are you sure?" His voice was tinged with doubt. "It's a long distance, and that creature's too close." "I'm sure," Zolaria replied, her voice unwavering. "It's our only shot. We move now." The two of them darted toward the structure, running at full speed. The ground cracked beneath their feet as they sprinted, dodging rocks and debris that fell from above. Every instinct in Zolaria's body screamed at her to look behind, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. She could hear the creature's growls growing louder and louder with each passing second, and the storm's ferocious winds began to pick up. Suddenly, the creature lunged, its massive jaws snapping shut just inches from Zolaria's heels. She stumbled forward, But Terran was there, grabbing her arm and pulling her out of the way just in time. The ground trembled as the monster's clawed feet scraped against the rock, threatening to crush them beneath its weight. "We're not going to make it," Terran shouted, his voice filled with fear. Zolaria gritted her teeth. She couldn't give up now. They had come too far. "Yes, we will. We just need to stay ahead of it. Don't look back." The storm above them seemed to intensify, the sky crackling with unnatural energy as lightning flashed dangerously close. The wind screamed around them, sending rocks and debris tumbling through the air. The planet itself seemed to be fighting them, as if it wanted them to fail. But Zolaria didn't stop. She pushed herself harder, her legs aching, her breath ragged in her chest. They were so close now. The structure loomed ahead, offering a glimpse of safety in this chaotic, deadly world. With one final burst of strength, Zolaria and Terran dove into the entrance of the structure just as the beast lunged again. The massive creature roared in frustration, its roar shaking the very ground beneath them. They had made it, for now. Inside the structure, they collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The storm raged outside, and the creature's furious growls echoed through the rocky terrain, but they were safe. For the moment. Zolaria looked up at Terran, a sense of disbelief washing over her. We did it." Terran gave a shaky laugh, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "We did, but we can't stay here long. That creature won't give up." She nodded. They both knew this wasn't over. The final trial was just beginning. They had survived the first part of the challenge, but the Deathworlders had set a trap, and they would need every ounce of their strength to make it through. The storm continued to rage outside, but in this moment of respite, Zolaria allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had faced the impossible and survived, but the real test was yet to come. Terran glanced at her. "We can't stop now. We've come this far. We finish it." Zolaria's resolve hardened. The Deathworld had thrown everything it had at them, but they weren't going to be defeated. Not yet. They would face whatever came next, together. "We finish it," she whispered, determination burning in her eyes. The final escape had just begun.